G'day legends, I hope that you're having a fantastic day and a fantastic end to your week. Now I know a lot of people are going to head back to work on Monday, so I hope that you enjoy the final days of the holiday period. Now legends, as always, we have a lot to go over in this video. So of course we'll be looking at the maps and we'll have a little bit of a roundup of 2024 and the total of kilometre square change that we have seen, as well as how much has moved over December as Deep State Map has updated, showing us then new gains. Now, with Deep State Map, it's good to see that they're back online. And I know Deep State and I don't see eye to eye all the time, but I'm incredibly surprised that I am one of the only people I've seen publicly really sticking up for Deep State Map and how the screws have been tightened down on them recently, just releasing their media. So then we're going to talk about gas. And of course, what we have seen is a little bit of misinformation here. Of course, as of the 1st of January, the gas supply running through Ukraine from Russia into other parts of Europe was cut off. Now, Russian gas energy giant Gazprom, they said, well, we turned it off. Well, maybe they turned off the taps, but it was going to be turned off one way or another. Remember, that exchange for that, one part of it is in Suja, of course, where Ukraine is occupying back into Kursk. But I've had a bit of a change of opinion somewhat on this to do with long-term and short-term. Is it a positive or a negative? And what is this sort of unspoken part of this that may give Ukraine a card on the table at negotiations, if that comes through, with Trump's presidency only being 18 days away? Something you, I, and many others have noticed is there seems to be a lot less footage of glide bombs, fabs, then being used, and Fighter Bomber has spoken about this, so we'll present that. But what we have seen is today released, and there's been rumours of this, but 1,700 Ukrainian soldiers trained and armed in France have gone AWOL, absent without leave, before a single shot has been fired. And this is actually a scenario that myself and some of my experts behind the scenes spoke about back in June, although many just dismissed this at this point in time. So I want to talk about that, but then I also want to talk about informational war and extend on what I said yesterday, that I believe the informational war online, in papers, everywhere, is going to get really, really nasty due to the importance of this and the industrial base that media through democracies definitely can shift. So I really want you guys around for that informational space, and that will link into a argument that I had with an AI about exactly this and what it was saying. So legends, look, let's start with these fabs. Now, Fighter Bomber, who, of course, pro-Russian, and reports on the fighter aircraft, the bombers, and the choppers, but he's very reliable when it comes to talking about losses. He hasn't confirmed or denied that there was a Russian assault helicopter go down today. It's unconfirmed. There's no footage of it, although some are saying that happened. Wait out on this. But he has basically answered the question of why are we seeing so many less fab strikes? And you and I have talked about it, and we've said, well, is it that there are less being dropped? Is it potentially from these long-range strikes? Is it improved air defense? What could it be? Now, he has spoken about this. The footage of LMUR's work has been rare lately. Now, an LMUR is a guided munition typically fired off a Kar-52 helicopter. You'll see a lot of like thermal imaging of this and it being guided in. I believe it can be both laser guided and optically guided from the pilot, but also Fab 3000s, UMPC, of course, different variations of glide bombs. It has to do with, well, I don't know what the hell it is. So he's saying, I don't know what it is, but he's saying there's everything. The work hasn't got any less, but the videos have. So what Fighter Bomber is saying, he's saying it's not that any less fabs or these guided and glide munitions, it's not that there's less of them being used, there's just a lot less footage coming out of this. Now, again, I'll leave this up to you. Is there less being fired, therefore we're seeing less footage, or the same amount and just the screws on footage being released has been tightened up? At this point in time, I'm somewhat on the side of there's just less footage, because no weapon system or policy change at the moment should have had a huge effect on the delivery of those fab missiles. The air defense hasn't had some dramatic increase. The long-range strategic strikes, it's not going to matter towards Su-34s. They are too far away, and the supply stockpiles of these dumb glide bombs are nowhere near out. Russia can produce those in massive numbers and doesn't doesn't need to produce them. They've got a shitload of these bombs left over they can then strap some wings onto. So I believe it may just be less footage. Why? Well, I don't know. It seems like the opposite that you'd want for the online informational war, what we'll speak about later on, and how that's going to get very nasty and potentially incredibly dangerous. So let's have a look at the maps and a bit of a roundup. So of course, here is Ukraine in the center of your screen, the capital of Kyiv. Red areas occupied since 22, the purple since 2014, the red check on this map, that represents new ground that Russia is occupying over the last 24 hours. But before we actually zoom in on the maps, let's have a look at this. And this is a graph I get put together showing the War Mapper and Deep State maps updates month to month. Now, War Mapper has not given us the December update yet, but what you can see is exactly what we had predicted. That I did say, I believe in the beginning of winter through December, that the kilometre square gains will be less just due to the fatigue of being on the offensive action for so long, both fatigue of men and fatigue on weapons, replacement, everything, as well as primarily just the changing conditions and working in that cold weather. And what we can see is the gains sit really just above what we saw in August, so 393 kilometre squares. Again, this is by Deep State. It may be more than this, but it is what Ukrainian Deep State map is saying. But what we can see is the total here over the year that Russia occupied 3,317.8 kilometre squares. So definitely a net gain there. Remember last year we saw basically a net zero change. Ukraine had its offensive, Russia had offensives, and zero change there. So the war, just that positional, it is moving. Is it moving a lot slower than some would say? Yes. Is it moving? Yes, it is. And of what we have seen, again, we could see it start increasing as the gains in December, yes, were less, but they were still more than all of the months prior, back over 12 months. So it's still a significant change in a positional, attritional war like we are seeing. Now, the main area we're going to come into today is Kurkov, of course, in this end of the lobe, in this pocket that we are seeing. So let's have a look at Kurkov here. And what we can see is significant gains on the south as well in the north. Now, remember, yesterday I showed you where there was a geolocation right about where my cursor is at this point. Now, other maps are showing that this has completely come under occupation. Whether it has or not is somewhat just splitting hairs, because the majority of it has. You're talking about 95 or 100%. I know that is important for the complete occupation, but regardless, the absolute vast majority of it has. But here is an interesting piece before we go and compare maps. Now, a Russian page shared this, a view of Kurkov today. The city was taken by Russian troops without any serious damage. Now, this is very, very serious damage. You can see areas on fire that have been shelled. Of course, there's been a shitload of fighting in here. So we need to be realistic about, yes, there's a lot of damage here. But what they're getting at is that exactly what we saw just north of here in areas like Seledov, that there is significantly less damage. Now, there's been a lot of damage here. I'm not trying to downplay that. But what we have seen in Bakhmut, in Avdiivka, in Mariupol, major areas like this, is for movements to go through. Basically, the city, look, Vuhledar, had to be almost completely demolished and flattened by artillery, by glide bombs to move through. And this was one of the primary concerns we said with Seledov, that didn't have that much damage when we compare to an area like Avdiivka. And what we said is this is concerning because it shows that there is a faster pace of movement here and not relying as much on that artillery or some of those bombs to clear these areas. There's been some withdrawal. Remember that footage of the tank operating in the center of Seledov with not that much damage around, well, at least not completely flat. Do you know what I'm getting at? Like, if this was just an average city, yeah, the damage is horrible. But some of these other cities have looked similar to what we see in like Gaza being the only way to move through. So this is a concern of, this shows the pace and resistance to as well, I believe. So let's have a look around Kurkov front, and we'll look where Noel reports another Ukrainian map has shown too. So this is the Surak Maps. Now, what he is showing isn't actually that dissimilar to this map, but what he is showing is, see where this comes out on the west, that it's basically just straight down here, has come under control, as well as you can see these black lines. These are major Ukrainian fortifications that have come under Russian control. The situation could go front. Russian army took full control of the locality of Shevchenko and the Ukrainian stronghold of Kurakhove. So Shevchenko just out in here as well, and full control over the stronghold here, where combing operations are taking place, as well as a new part of the trench system south of it, where these two maps are lining up, that south of it, new trench system had come under control. So we definitely can confirm that the other parts coming under control. In this case, I'm inclined to look and believe at what Surak is saying. I've seen many other pages say that no, it's not completely occupied or liberated, depending on who is reporting it, but there are combing operations being done, and within 24 hours it will be. But what we know is Kurkov has almost all come under occupation, if not all of it. But let's look just to the north of here, of course, study Ternivy Shevchenko, where that dam went down, and another map. Then, of course, Noel reports showing this. Now, he's not showing that the Russians have taken Shevchenko, but he is showing that from Stary Turny, that a lot of red zone has been filled in here, as you can still see some grey pockets in here. So I do believe that this has closed up as well, potentially to the west and south of Kurakhove as well. So definitely some advancements being made on this front. Then we'll come to the west, and we have, of course, Velika Novosilka. Now, what you can see is grey zone up over this last road, and then red zone moving toward that. But we have seen Ukrainian drones targeting Russian positions down this road in some of these tree lines. Now, that doesn't mean that they hold that area, but there was definitely a presence of Russian forces there. This is a big problem for the pocket developing around Velika Novosilka, as well from Novy Komar all the way through to the northeastern push from Rivnapil. Again, I'd say watch this space at this point in time. Now that Kurkov has fallen, I think Velika Novosilka is where the Russians will put a lot of their effort at the moment. So let's move our way up a little bit. We can see Solone, west of Pishani, and I'm not going to try and pronounce it, I get it wrong every time, but basically on the Pokrovsk Udashny front. Again, doing what we thought, they would push towards Udashny to try and get that flank and the logistics route before a push on Pokrovsk itself. So we have a couple of map updates in here from Surak Maps. Now, this is firstly what he's showing. This is this Kotlini in here, movement in this front. Again, the maps may not show the same, but are they showing very bloody similar? Yeah, this red dot, this is Solone, and this one is Pishani. So it's showing a bit more of a fill-in, but realistically it's showing movement in the same direction. So then we can confirm there. But saying that the Russian army made advances towards Solone, west of Volkove, and the Russian forces are now 2 kilometers from the western supply route or to Pokrovsk city. So let's measure this then on the pro-Ukrainian deep state map. Yep, 1.76 kilometers from there. This is going to be a big problem if and when the Russians get to here, of course. This is well within range of artillery and drones, and depending on the ground, some lower vehicles such as tanks too. So again, watch this space. It will also be in range of Russian ATGMs. Again, depending on the ground in this area and dead spots, high zones too. Then we get a second Pokrovsk update as well out of Surak. Situation Pokrovsk front. Russian army made new advances west of Volkove, captured most of Solone and half of this one here. Of course, this is right down in here. Again, we can confirm that advancement because it's shown across both maps. In addition, Russian forces made some advances south of this area, of course, here as well. Sorry, I was slightly incorrect on the location up near Uspnivka. So we can see further changes on that map, and some are saying that Russia through January will have a higher kilometre square month than December as they were settling into winter, and now the winter offensive will push. Just wait out on this. But of course, this is the western flank of the battle for Pokrovsk going towards Udashny. But what we are going to see is an eastern flank made more and more around Horovka, and we can see there's been over 3 days, 3 different movements up in this area, just to the east of Minigrad. Let's give a measurement just to get our bearings all right. So about 17 kilometers away from here, there has been further and further pushing, and today is no different. Deep state map showing this, as well as Surak. Now, again, we know there's advancement in this area because both maps are saying there's advancement, but Surak is just showing that where my cursor is then going right now, that all that has been cut off. But what we do know is for multiple days in a row, Russians have got then more ground here that has been corroborated across both maps. Then we'll come into Toretsk. No changes shown on this map, but Surak does show that towards Avdiivka that the Russians have made more ground. Of course, there's been some back and forward and have made significant ground in the center of Toretsk as well. So if we have a look at, see where this road has this slight like sort of dog leg in it, that it's right out in this area. See where this is? I believe this is probably maybe a mine spoil in here, that it's inline. So right out here, as well as coming to Kreminsky as well. So let's just measure, let's say that this has moved to there, some 1.3 kilometers further than this map is showing, if we take Surak to be the truth on this, which is significant, especially in urban combat, and the strategic significance, of course, of Toretsk. Now, I believe that is all the changes on the map. I had a quick flick through. If I missed something, I apologize. But let's have a look at this AWOL desertion, however you want to say it. Now, firstly, someone I disagree with a lot, but I judge not the way he does his work, I judge the numbers put in. But Andrew here, who I believe is a very good analyst, but I believe some of the figures he puts in are incorrect. Therefore, at the end, some of it can be incorrect. But again, I'd love to have him on the podcast, and if he changed my mind, fantastic too. But this I vehemently agree with. Will there be any point in time where Ukraine learns from past mistakes and stops making new brigades and reinforces the brigades that exist? And I 100% agree with this. And this is basics of protracted attritional warfare doctrine. And what I believe he's getting at here are the 1,700 Ukrainian soldiers that we have seen then go AWOL, absent without leave, off then the line in Ukraine, but also in France also, which I want to speak about. But back to his idea here about, instead of making new brigades, reinforce ones. This is in some of the doctrine. Once initial training is complete, they should be fed into secondary sectors. No formation should be allowed to fall below 70% strength. So you put these guys into secondary sectors, so then they get experience, and you withdraw early, so experience proliferates through new replacements as veterans pass on their skills. If you don't do this, then valuable experience is lost, causing the process to start all over. Another implication is that resources should prioritize replacements over new formations, preserving the combat edge in the both pre-war army, the high army, and in newly raised low formations. Again, attritional war is won by the best low-end formation and the ability to then replace those soldiers, those formations, but never going below 70% strength. You reinforce, then experience proliferates in that, even with losses, not just forming whole new companies, brigades, anything from there. So before we get into the AWOL, let's talk a little bit about the informational war. So I want to go back to this. Now, this is one of the things we spoke about specifically to do with going AWOL, desertion off the line. We spoke about this back in June. Now, I can't find the original message because that was off another one of my Ausint guys, but this is off one saying that he believes he is correct. So the 14th of June back here, I think your friend may be onto something about why France would be training Ukrainian soldiers in Ukraine rather than on European Union soil. But at most, EU governments would be concerned about the embarrassment of the situation could cause if the blokes applied for asylum, not the asylum itself, and talks about some of the demographics in the EU. But this is when France, President Macron, was speaking about putting trainers in Ukraine to train soldiers rather than in France. And we said at the time, why does that make sense over training in France? And what it was is because if those guys seek asylum there, it's going to be embarrassing and they're going to be lost to be able to be conscripted or go back into Ukraine. Now, all of these troops, not all 1,700 have done that. I believe it's about 50 from the article, but it's still a relevant point to make that was dismissed at the time. And a lot of it gets dismissed due to the informational war. And this is what I wanted to look at here with Tataragami Ue, someone who I'd love to have on the podcast, whether anonymous, confidential, however, I would love to do it. But talking about where he breaks this of, with over 1,700 soldiers went AWOL from the 155th Brigade before combat deployment. This should serve as an indictment of the Commander-in-Chief Alexander Slitzky. The brigade armed with Western weaponry and trained in France, thus the issue in organisational and leadership failure. And there was a comment here, as true as this may be, I can't see how it helps. Some things remain best left unsaid publicly and sorted out privately. A house divided. And goes, none of these issues are new. They have largely remained unaddressed for several years and with little to no changes. Let's stay silent until things get even worse and then discuss it when it's too late to make any difference, hoping that they will get fixed on their own. And this is what I say, bringing sunlight to something bad is not in the other side's interest. It is in your interest to fix these. And Tatragami UA has been talking about command and control issues and internal policy issues around this for some time, trying to bring light to that to get it fixed, because so much of it is swept under the rug or put as propaganda that then it can operate without anyone looking into it, and causes more and more of the situation that we can find ourselves in. And this is what I want to extend on yesterday when I said my prediction that over this next year, the informational war, which is already very nasty online, is going to get way, way more nasty to potentially dangerous. Ukraine needs to keep the global media on their side. This is the industrial base for Ukraine. And this is why, if you push back on some of these narratives, no matter how false or nuanced that needs to be added, you will be attacked and you will be pinned as Putin's best mate, as a Kremlin propagandist, as working for the Russians, whatever. Because people will see that if you are painting a realistic picture, if you are trying to give the truth to what is occurring, then they will say that you are benefiting Russia by doing this. Because instead of painting an idealistic picture, you're being more realistic. But if you're not painting more of an idealistic picture, then people will say that you are taking away support to Ukraine, because then it's not this kumbaya level thing and the media on the side being more optimistic to send in more arms and military aid. So, in turn, if things are bad and you're a realist and you're reporting on this, you can be and will be seen, at least online at this point, as an enemy of the state. And as Ukraine is the West's number one ally, and its project to demilitarize and weaken Russia on a global scale, you could almost be seen as committing treason. Now, I know that is maybe extreme, but I believe over the next 12 months, we're going to see more and more informational nastiness happen. And I said yesterday, I'll say it again, when realists get pinned as propagandists and idealists get pinned as heroes, regardless of their cost of the ideals of that idealism, that can be a huge problem when you are just trying to tell the truth. But if the truth isn't in the narrative, it can be seen as dangerous. Well, there might be some extra force or incentive, I guess, to shut up. And this was something interesting that I found. I asked ChatGPT who it thinks is winning on the battlefield, and it wouldn't give me an answer. And this aligns with what I shared earlier this week, when it finally did give me some level of answer. Now, this was pulling me up on something and gave me a lot to think about. You often remind your viewers, propaganda is used to support military operations, not the other way around. In attritional war, any terrain that does not have a vital industrial centre is irrelevant. In just about every attritional war, this is correct, in my opinion. But what about in this one? What is Ukraine's vital industrial centre? I'd argue that it is precisely propaganda. That for Ukraine to receive more arms, to get more military aid, all of this is relying on the informational propaganda war. And again, if being a realist and reporting on that does not align with that, you could be seen as an enemy. And online you will be, but I don't know how it's going to go through Western governments, as this is the number one international issue, talking point at the moment. And I think over this year, it's going to become more and more extreme. And this is to my conversation I had with ChatGPT. I was asking about, who do you think objectively is winning on the battlefield at the moment? And it wouldn't tell me. And I kept arguing with it, which it is fun. And it goes, and I ask, well, why was your response idealistic? And it says, default reliance on widely accepted narratives. My training includes exposure to global media, where Ukraine struggles are often framed in a more optimistic light to maintain Western support. Exactly what my contact here has said, and exactly why I think if you are a unbiased realist reporting on this war, it's going to get nasty for you over the next 12 months. Without a critical push, initial responses can be unconsciously echo these narratives. That's why you have to push and push and push on some of these machines like this. But this first line, exposure to global media where Ukraine struggles are often framed in more optimistic lights, this tells us a hell of a lot about the industrial centre, as well as how the media is spinning a lot of this. Now, let's talk about these soldiers going AWOL. And we talked about Tatarigami UA saying that 1,700 had here, and he shared the article that I'm about to show you. He said, I wrote about this on December the 15th, though I refrained from mentioning specific units. This is a systemic problem and not an isolated case of bad brigade or wrong soldiers. It will persist until the president will make changes in military leadership. Now, let's be realistic here. This isn't just a problem on the Ukrainian side. There are many Russians going AWOL or deserting also. But what we do know is there's been tens of thousands, upwards of 60,000 cases of desertion on the line. And Russia does not have the acute manpower issues that Ukraine does at this point in time. Although if you point out that Ukraine does have acute manpower problems, it's painted as propaganda. And then things like this presented through Ukrainian media, through Ukrainian journalists, you present that. And still, if you're not towing that narrative, you're not one of these idealistic people pushing, regardless of what the cost is actually to the men at the front line, you can be seen as an enemy. Ukraine's, and this was what he was tweeting back to, and I believe we share this one, Ukraine's failure to fix organisational issues and replace inefficient commanders has eroded trust in the system to the point where severe recruitment shortages and desertion levels are so high that no amount of aid can fix it. Again, this is what I believe Putin and his generals are looking at, is they're going, it doesn't matter about if Keith Kellogg or Trump say, you're not willing, we're going to send in all these arms, because I believe what they are seeing is no, the organisational issues leading to recruitment and manpower problems, that is the number one issue. Even if there's new influxes of weapons, eventually there's going to be no one on the back end of that trigger or on the steering wheel or putting a bomb up the spout, and that this needs to be fixed. Again, like I shared from Tatarigami UA, responding to someone going, light needs to be brought to these topics. But a little bit of a funny one. Remember, this happened with a French-trained unit, and Yuri here goes, well, isn't that French doctrine? Just a little bit of a piss take. And someone else here goes to me, he goes, I said, no power, morale, or corruption issues, because that is Kremlin propaganda. And someone goes, I swear you talked about this thing possibly like a week ago. And I said, I did, because, well, hence the caption. So, again, those who tried to pin that on me, I'll take my apology now. Again, this is the original news site that put it up, a pro-Ukrainian media site. They're the ones that put it up if you want to go and read it, and now we will go through it. The true story of Anna of Kiev. The State Bureau of Investigation opened a case against the 155th Brigade, armed in France and thrown unprepared near Pokrovsk, with 1,700 going AWOL. Now, Anna of Kiev, I'm not really sure why it is named of this. Potentially a play on Anna Karenina. Of course, a fantastic novel. If you get the chance to read it in the time, please do. It will really be impactful. It's fantastic, but it is long. Like everything that Tolstoy writes, it is incredibly bloody long, the chapter describing a flower or something. But let's talk about this. The true story of Anna Kievska. The State Bureau of Investigation opened a case regarding the formation of the 155th. The State Bureau of Investigation opened a criminal case in December regarding the circumstances of the formation of the 155 Mech Brigade Anna Kievska, which entered a battle near Pokrovsk. The case is under the control of Supreme Commander-in-Chief Vladimir Zelensky, Prime Minister Rustem Umerov, and Commander-in-Chief Alexander Sursky. One of the leaders responsible for forming the brigade died of a heart attack. Awfully convenient. I know if this was on the Russian side, it would be seen as convenient as well. He had a heart attack and then fell out a window. The brigade commander was relieved of his duties immediately after the brigade entered combat. Before the brigade fired its first shot, 1,700 soldiers left it voluntarily. Now, SBU investigators were tasked with finding the culprits. Testimony of materials showed the public a formation of new brigades in the 140s, 150s and 160s from scratch, without command personnel, technical specialists, weapons or drones. This is what it leads to. So you're forming these new units under brigades without then command personnel, technical specialists. It's going to have poor outcomes. And this is what I say, that the manpower problem can't be fixed in months. It would probably take years. And that once it gets bad, if you're not refilling a brigade getting below 70% strength, you're losing that experience. Like I showed in the doctrine, big problems. This is indeed a crime, but the crime is not of soldiers and officers, but the leaders of the Supreme Commander-in-Chief's headquarters, the Ministry of Defense, and the General Staff. So Umerov, Sursky, and Zelensky, who continue to waste lives and state funds on new projects and taxpayer funds from the West. Who do you think paid, I believe, the $900 million to train and arm these guys? Instead of strengthening experience and combat-ready brigades, they are trying to shirk responsibility by shifting from the hands of the SBUs to the officers put in a hopeless situation. So saying that it's the officers' problems for guys who went AWOL here, not these guys not having a chance, going, fuck this, I'm saving my life, and leaving. So, the criminal case, the SBI here, I think, is a mistranslation to SBU. If I'm incorrect, I apologise. The SBU case was events in France, where the 155th Brigade was sent for training. The project was the highest political priority for the Supreme Commander-in-Chief, Volodymyr Zelensky. Came up with the plan for NATO allies to form 14 new brigades, for which Ukraine would find people, and partners should find weapons. Again, like Andrew said, like the doctrine says, should be focused on then putting guys into existing brigades rather than the forming of new ones due to experience, due to a whole plethora of issues. The cost of the project for one such brigade was determined to be about 900 million euros, so almost 1 billion euros. This was not to be cash. 80% of the cost would be in heavy weapons in the form of tanks, armoured vehicles and artillery, which the Allies were to supply from their weapon stocks or produce new ones. The first such project for a new complete brigade was the 155th. President Macron himself announced the brigade. Now, they were completing their training in France. Once fully filled, the obligations, training and arming, the brigade of the Ukrainians demanded, but during the training stage, more than 50 servicemen escaped from the new brigade in France. Again, exactly what we spoke about, saying if this is done in France, a lot of these guys may take the opportunity because they can't leave Ukraine legally otherwise to seek asylum there, and due to demographics, countries like France and Germany won't really want to send home young people. A lot of demographic problems happening in Europe, also in Ukraine and in Russia too. This raised question among French leadership about the seriousness of the Ukrainians' attitude to the implementation of such an expensive project. Again, a lot of these guys still seem motivated, but they weren't given a chance, so they walked off the line. General Staff of Ukraine and Civil Defence Corps contained any reservations regarding mobile servicemen who cannot be recommended as candidates for training in France. The State Bureau wants to answer one main question for Zelensky: who should be responsible for the escape of soldiers in France? The investigation does not see, in fact, the events in France could have happened because the chaos was predetermined in advance. So who is responsible for this happening? I can tell you who's responsible. You're not allowed to leave the country. Guys get called up, conscripted, whatever, and they go, fuck this, I am out. Stage 1, people. The 155 Brigade formed in March 24. An experienced commander, Dmytro Rumishin, was appointed by its commander. At the very beginning, it turned out that the West had neither command personnel, nor soldiers, nor weapons, nor resources to create a new unit. The staffing schedule of 155, the number of personnel by the time it went to the front for each month, and the parenthesis, the number of then AWOL, I believe this is what it means, this word here, which translates to unauthorised abandonment of military unit, or basically just AWOL, of how many people had gone AWOL and the problems that this had. Left for training in France in October. At that time, the brigade already had 935 people go AWOL, and you can see this increasing through the months. And one thing is, this tends to actually increase with the number of kilometre squares that Russia was gaining faster and faster on the front line. This is a major problem. In fact, the brigade's recruitment began in June, but they did not have time to undergo fully fledged training, since in July and August, more than 2,550 servicemen were taken from the 155 to replenish other units, so disbanding that. That is, they took almost all the fully qualified personnel from the brigade, so the experience could not proliferate, whom the brigade commander and combat units had just assigned to positions, effectively nullifying all the previous 4 months of work in March and June. That is, the brigade's composition was organised in August according to a new one, and then they issued an order to prepare everyone who remained for the trip to France at the end of September. As a result, 1,924 servicemen were sent to France as part of the 155, with whom only 51 had more than a year of military experience, 459 had less than a year, and the majority, over 1,400, were enlisted and served less than 2 months, including about 150 newly recruited people without any selection. So again, this is saying that I don't know what they have actually passed without passing the BZVP. I'm unsure what that is, but it sounds like basic level of health and fitness to be there. Again, there is an acute manpower shortage. It was and a morale problem as well. It's a morale crisis, which none of this helps. If these guys have gone, I'm walking off the fucking line because I am going to die. There's no correct command. We're being thrown into the front line. And these guys have received some of probably the better training and armament. It was among them the largest number of deserters in France. In total, about 50 military, soldiers here had fled in France. While the entire brigade command was training in France, 1,000 new people were enrolled without the presence of the brigade and battalion commanders. As a result, in October-November, more than 700 people fled from the brigade on the territory of Ukraine immediately after being enrolled. Now, because these guys fled on the territory of Ukraine, they can't seek like asylum in France. So I would say that these guys are actually motivated to fight, but they have gone, but part of my motivation to fight is you have to give me the correct training, command, and support to fight. And if that isn't there, I'm walking off the line. So the ones that have then deserted, gone AWOL in France have, in my opinion, no motivation to fight. The ones that have gone AWOL within Ukraine, coming back, I think they probably have motivation, but the requirements that they see as the minimum for keeping them alive or having success on the battlefield isn't there. From November 15th, the brigade's rank and file began to be returned to Ukraine. The brigade's headquarters remained on schedule to complete the headquarters training, for which the French instructors gave the highest remarks. The Brigadier General Remeshin did not have time to get acquainted to his 4,000 new subordinates who were waiting at the training centre to conduct the planned additional training. Didn't obtain all the necessary knowledge in absence of headquarters and commanders. The command and the West began to transfer untrained and uncoordinated people to Pokrovsk, so feeding them into the hottest area of the front line. Remember what I said to agree with Andrew when I showed you that doctrine? Newly trained guys, you have to feed into secondary sectors to get experience. Again, fed into Pokrovsk. This is the hottest area. And back a slide where I spoke about most of these guys had not had much experience on the front line. Immediately, Brigadier General Mission's arrival from France to Pokrovsk during the brigade's deployment, the CSR commissioned visited there, which wrote a conclusion that the brigade commander was to blame for the escape of 50 servicemen of the brigade in France. So saying he's to blame for that happening, who allegedly did not devote time to communicating with the personnel, and therefore morale and psychological state of the people was allegedly low. In the first week of December, even before entering battle, the brigade had another almost 200 people go AWOL, and the performance of combat missions was extremely complicated, which led to significant losses of people due to poor control and training. So if these guys hadn't had good command control and training and almost 200 guys walking off the line, the performance in combat is, of course, going to suffer. Conclusion: most soldiers 155 at the front to perform their duties honestly, but as a result of such criminal attitude towards the lives of the soldiers, the 155 has suffered significant losses from the first days. Not only losses at the front, but guys going AWOL too. There are combatants who go to the assault because there is no one else. There are soldiers who fight for every position to the last. From the first days, they perform real feats. Next to the 155 are experienced units. Da Vinci, Airborne, Jaeger have acute shortage of people in the infantry. They cannot hold a wide strip because of this, and they are experienced UAV units, headquarters and command personnel who can quickly train and take mobilised people and combat ready. Again, these units that can do this, these soldiers should have been put into those existing brigades rather than forming new ones. That is what the doctrine says. It's not what I say, it's what the doctrine says. But experienced and combat-ready brigades were not given people, and they are not allowed to stabilise the front because people are given to political projects, same as the 155th. The other brigades reformed in 24, the 14 Slitzky had spoken about. Again, putting guys into existing brigades, that isn't a PR win. And what they're saying is this is a political project by Zelensky that has then completely failed, but also jeopardised the other units that have an acute manpower shortage that could have used them. The country's top political military leadership actually played with 155 and a Kievska brigade without even trying to systematically prepare and train the brigade, and without giving the brigade commanders time to create combat-ready teams themselves. The brigade's servicemen became hostages of Zelensky's PR project, as well as there are many other cases of this currently, some of which I think long-term will backfire. This, Kursk, and there are several others. It is worth mentioning separately about military command, which is now trying to hide the truth and use the SBU case to absolve itself of responsibility. They gave this an unsatisfactory in the beginning for the capability assessment report, but someone put pressure above and the general signed everything off and pushed a completely unfit brigade to the front, giving it a satisfactory rating. So it was seen that these guys did not meet the capability, but some pressure came down and suddenly unsatisfactory, the little got rubbed out. The attempts of the command to OK the West and command of the ground forces report the leadership of the Armed Forces, the Ministry of Defence and General Staff to falsify the real causes of personal problems have not led to an improvement, but to a deterioration of the situation. This goes into the manpower we talk about, as well as the nastiness of the informational war, because if it doesn't fit that narrative, if it doesn't fit the idealistic narrative, you can be seen as an enemy. And the guy who wrote this article, he will cop a lot. The Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, Alexander Slitzky, has removed the brigade commanders, deciding to strengthen the combat capability of 155 by sending to Pokrovsk a commission consisting of the commander of the guy in the West as well, and the OK of what is happening here. So to try and alleviate what is happening there and somewhat hide this project as well. On December 30, Colonel Slitzky died from a heart attack while performing his duties. He was worried about the case, and therefore, if we want to save people's lives, investigate the case of 155 so this does not happen again. Again, maybe it seems awful convenient. Again, but from those alive and vigorous who gave such orders and made such inadequate demands are, and this guy calls out Zelensky, Umarov, Sursky, and the commander of the ground forces. He's calling out everyone here, saying this PR project that you have then made inadequate demands and that you are somewhat responsible for this. And speaking of, papers demanded for them, closing their eyes, later fake reports about capability soldiers, patriotic and motivated citizens, the best of the best, who see this mess but do everything possible to go to battle, lay down their lives in battle, will pay with blood. So, of course, just closing your eyes to what may be happening, then focusing on PR and missing what is happening in the back end, as well as jeopardizing guys that are motivated and are willing to fight and die and lay down their lives. And is it worth it, Mr. Zelensky, Mr. Umarov and Mr. Kursk, the lives of dozens of people who gave their lives near Pokrovsk as part of the 155 due to elementary disorder and poor preparation? Will you testify to the SBU investigators about how you brought the 155 to such a state, how you spent huge amounts of money from our allies and Ukrainian citizens, and how instead of strengthening the front, you are only disrupting the organisation and training of reserves? I hope that time will come, and it is you, the ones truly responsible for the case, who will be the first to answer above the law. Appeal to civil society to help me spread this story, force the authorities to ban the formation of new, unequipped brigades and stop the harmful PR projects of the authorities in the army, and direct all resources to replenish combat-ready and experienced brigades and battalions such as the one he spoke about on the previous slide that should have been backfilled with men rather than the formation of new brigades because it looks good in a Twitter post. And this is something we're going to see more and more. We're going to see eventually people not be able to ignore what is actually happening, as the situation, like he says, is going to further deteriorate if this sort of shit continues. Now, let's talk about gas. And Volodymyr Zelensky, the president of Ukraine, has posted this, talking about over 25 years how much gas went through Ukraine to Europe, and now that it is down at zero. Of course, some is still crossing under the Black Sea into Turkey and then can be moved across. But through Ukraine, there is none. Somewhat. Unless you're talking about some of the liquefied natural gas that is sent to other nations and irreparably ends up back in Ukraine. As a result of Russia weaponizing energy and resorting to cynical blackmail partners, Moscow lost one of the most profitable and geographically accessible markets. Given such circumstances, the vast majority of European countries have adjusted to the changes. A joint task today is to support Moldova during this energy transformation period. We must overcome the hysteria of some European politicians. He's speaking here, of course, primarily about Slovakian Prime Minister Robert Fico, who prefer mafia-style schemes with Moscow to transparent energy policy. I'm going to go over all this in a sec, just wait. We also hope for an increased American gas supply to Europe, which President Trump has already mentioned. Again, convenient. Cooperation with maximum supply from all partners will result in more comfortable prices on the market. Again, it is going to be nowhere even close to as cheap. He used the word comfortable here. The more gas available on the market from Europe's true partners, the sooner the last remaining consequences of Europe's reliance on Russia will be eliminated. So, of course, calling out Slovakia, Hungary, Czech Republic, Austria to a degree about their reliance on this. But again, I've had some thoughts about this. Short term, I think this is bad for Ukraine and the EU. I believe it's going to have more effect on the money going through Ukraine, the money Ukraine was receiving from that deal, than it is Russia, and even further effect on then Europe, the EU's industry paying so much more for gas, trying to stay competitive. As we know, the cost of living, especially the cost of gas, is already up. And if you think that gas going through a pipe is going to compete with gas then turned into LNG, moved on a ship, thousands of kilometres, then taken off the ship, blah, 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 all this. You think that's going to compete in price? No, it might be, quote, more comfortable, but it's not going to compete. So this will increase the cost of living and will also decrease the industrial competitiveness. But I think long term, it can be good also. But another problem in this short and long term is countries that are unhappy with this have a say, of course, in Ukraine's future. Czech Republic, Slovakia, Hungary, other nations in here, they, of course, have a huge say in the EU and NATO entry. Of course, both things Ukraine want, and it says on an irreversible path towards. These countries, though, have a large say in this. And, of course, that industry will lose competition. So I think as far as who it's worse for short term, I think, firstly, it's the EU is going to get hit the hardest, then Ukraine, actually, and then Russia. But wait, because I think there's something we are missing in this. Zelensky makes Trump and expensive gas going into the US, makes Trump and those gas companies very happy. So that is a pro for Zelensky, getting Trump maybe further on his side for this. Long term, and I'm talking not years, maybe half a decade or more, it will force the EU to be more self-sufficient. Of course, the EU for a long time, the best things that happen to the EU, I think long term, either it's going to be horrible or better, is America saying you need to have your own security, and Russia with cutting off the gas, and Ukraine cutting the gas, Russia cutting gas, a little bit of everything here, being self-sufficient, being security efficiency and energy efficiency. The EU for too long relied on cheap Russian gas and cheap American security. Self-sufficiency, I think long-term, I've got hiccups, long-term will be the best thing for the EU. But what is missed in this is that this potentially gives Zelensky a card in negotiations. By taking something away, turning off those taps, but by taking away means he can also give it back. So with this gas, Ukraine has given itself a card at negotiations. Now, because it's taken that away, okay, well, we can give that back if you give back whatever, you give back X. And this is going to be further exacerbated by energy in Transnistria. Of course, a Russian-friendly breakaway. The gas there has been cut. So further, that card may be larger on the table. Now, is it 110,000 square kilometres? No. There's been other markets found. It's going to impact in other areas. But I believe by doing this, Zelensky has given himself a card on the table, and the coal that Transnistria is going to be put in, as well as making Trump happy by buying expensive American gas off American companies. And this is what I talk about with Transnistria. This is reported by Reuters. Breakaway Moldovan region of Transnistria cut heating and hot watering supplies to households on Wednesday after Russia stopped supplying gas via Ukraine. Russia didn't stop. Yeah, they might have turned off the tap first, but Ukraine was cutting it regardless. That's where the misinformation I spoke at the beginning. There's no heating or hot water. Transnistria is a pro-Russian entity that split from the rest of Moldova after the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991. It was receiving Russian gas via Ukraine, and the supply route was halted on Wednesday. The cuts took effect at 7 a.m., but some facilities, such as hospitals, were exempt. It urged residents to dress warmly, gather family members together in a single room, hand blankets or thick curtains over windows and balcony doors, and use electric heaters, saying it's forbidden to use gas or electric stoves to heat the apartment. This can lead to tragedy. And I believe it was -1 or 0 on New Year's Day in Moldova. Of course, in Transnistria, there are some 1,500 Russian troops stationed there. I should show you where this is. Again, this is Moldova here. This is Andrew Tate's home of Romania. But we have Moldova, and this red area in here, this is Transnistria. This is what we believe the Russians, at this point where they got right out to here, were actually trying to envelop Odessa by reaching. Yes, there's 1,500 soldiers here. There is a biblical amount of Soviet munitions and arms there too. That's worth taking note of. But also, Russia sees that as part of its own. Gas, there's going to be people cold here. Again, could be a card on the table for Zelensky. The bloc of parliament last month sent an appeal to the Kremlin and Russian parliament to reach an agreement with Ukraine to enable gas supplies to continue. Until the expiry of gas transit, Russia was supplying Moldova with about 2 billion cubic metres of gas per year pumped via Transnistria. And, of course, back through Ukraine. Moldova accuses Russia of exploiting its energy dependence on Moscow in order to destabilise the country. You know what you could do? You can seek other energy dependencies. You know, I think people go, well, Russia's holding us hostage because of this energy. Well, you can find sovereign independent energy sources. You're just going to pay more for it. So you are taking advantage of cheap energy, and they can then destabilize from there. But there is a way to cut that, and that is what we are seeing Ukraine do at the moment. And I believe Ukraine should have done years ago, but I still believe the $1 billion that Ukraine received, 800 million to $1 billion for that gas, the 5 billion that Russia loses, but there's going to be billions, I believe, in industrial loss in Europe due to higher energy, going to be a huge problem. I think the way around this is going to be telling Germany about their solar panels aren't going to work in Europe. They don't work in Australia to like base load. Turn back on the nuclear reactors, and that will supply a shitload more electricity that could maybe buffer how Slovakia is feeling about a shortage of gas, then relying more on electricity. Now, there is going to be electricity pumped into Moldova via Ukraine. Now, some have said, and I don't know on this, I haven't looked into it, but some have said that is misleading, that this energy is coming from the EU into Ukraine and then moving into Moldova. It's not being locally produced. As we know, there are already rolling blackouts and power grid issues, but I'll look into more of that over the next couple of days. Legends, sorry these are getting so long. Look after yourself. Have a great day, and I'll speak to you tomorrow, and it's a Friday. Okay, thank you. Bye-bye.